Hello everyone, I'm Staff Sergeant Jansen, 25th APS Special Handling. This is a video in conjunction with our virtual UTA for July, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the Joint Inspection Program. I'd like to go over some of the governing directives for the JI program, who's in charge, what kind of regulations we look at. Then I'd like to go through and look at our JI kit, what we have, any of the materials that we have that we use anytime we do a JI. And then we're going to sort of do a JI on one of our pickup trucks, just to kind of give you an idea of what we normally do. I'm out here in the MHE yard. The bird machine is off, so if you hear any loud bird noises happening, real birds, I can't do anything about it. They have no respect for Air Force NCO, so it is what it is. I'm going to start by going through a little bit of the book that they use in the JI school. I went to Dobbins for a week back in February and did the initial JI class. So this is the book right here. I have a copy of it in our JI kit as well. The JI program is governed ultimately by HQAMC A4T. They're the ones, as everything rolls downhill, they're the ones who have primary responsibility. The unit commander's responsibility is to appoint in writing qualified JI program managers, training instructors, and individuals that have successfully completed all training requirements to become JI qualified. So if you're not on the commander's JI letter, you're not actually a JI. You may hold the qualifications, but you have to be on the letter to really conduct JIs. Of course, you can help, obviously, you can be involved, but you can't, sign the paperwork and stuff like that. The training requirements to become JI qualified. First of all, you have to be a 5-level 2T2. Next, you have to have completed the book says either hazmat preparer or hazmat inspector. Now, 2T2s don't go to preparer. I did back when I was active duty, and they changed that pretty soon after I went. Preparers and inspectors are completely different things, and a 2T2 just really doesn't do anything that a preparer does. So it's kind of pointless for us to go there. But the inspector course, it is a one-week course. You go over the 24204 primarily, and you learn how to inspect hazardous cargo. You also need to be up to date on your CVTs, specifically air freight palletization, air freight explosives, air freight mobility, and air terminal operations center, ATTLA. And you also have to successfully complete the JI program training, the initial training. To really be a qualified JIer, though, you have to complete some OJT. Essentially, after you've gone through all that training, what you need to do is do JIs out in the field with a JIer. Have them kind of show you the ropes, because you're really not going to learn everything about it in a school. You can't learn everything about JI in a book. You have to actually get your hands on it, see it in person, because there's a lot of stuff that you're going to have to JI. There's a lot of things that you need to look for. There's a lot of things that units try to get away with. Down overseas in a deployed environment, they're going to try to smuggle all kinds of crap that they shouldn't be having. They're grenades, souvenir firearms. I mean, honestly, JIers have uncovered drug rings before. It is actually a big deal. So yeah, to be fully qualified, you actually need to get your hands on it and really do it. The governing regulation that covers the JI program is the DTR 4500.9R-R. I'm sure it's written in here someplace. Specifically Part 3, mobility. There's a few appendixes, I believe it's O through S, that actually kind of govern pretty much everything involving the JI process. I have a couple of copies of those forms in the JI kit. We're going to go over that a little bit. And as much as I can, I'm going to try to put links in the description for different forms and maybe some regulations, so that while you're watching this video or afterwards, you can maybe look at them yourself and kind of follow along. Responsibilities under the JI program for the mobility force, which is us. Our responsibilities include validate all load plans, cargo, and passenger manifests, supervise load teams, provide technical assistance to the user, coordinate airflow information, and control airlift aircraft. It's really weird. Join and inspect the user's cargo, provide MHE and operators when none is available, and provide or expand automated data systems availability. So basically what that tells you is that we validate, we inspect, we assist whenever a deploying unit is trying to move cargo. The deploying unit's responsibilities are to prepare their own personnel, cargo, and equipment according to the DTR parts 1, 2, and 3. This includes preparing and certifying hazardous cargo and equipment, preparing and certifying aircraft load plans, provide trained load teams to load, offload, and secure the cargo to the aircraft, furnish any required shoring, dunnage, and vehicle operators, provide personnel and equipment to perform ADACG functions, prepare and transmit personnel and cargo electronic manifests, provide and operate MHE to load and unload aircraft when it is within the unit's capability, request SAM supporting through service validator, and prepare cargo and equipment using designated automatic identification technology, RFID tags. Essentially, it is up to the user, it's up to the deploying unit who has cargo that they want to move. It's their responsibility to ensure that it is prepared properly, that the cargo is prepared properly, to provide enough personnel to load it with our assistance. That is, in a perfect world, exactly how it should go. Does it always? No. Essentially, that's it as far as we're concerned today. There is a lot that goes into governing this program. There's a lot that goes into this career field in general. So for the purpose of this video and this training, we're just going to kind of go over a JIR's responsibilities. Anyone who has a little bit more experience than me that's watching this, go ahead in the comments below, or during your discussion on Virtual UTA Day. If I miss anything, if I get anything wrong, or if you want to expound on anything that I've said, please feel free. I'm not really a seasoned JIR, so any help in helping everybody understand, if I say anything that's confusing, would be greatly appreciated. So next, what we have is the Joint Inspection Quick Reference Guide. Now, the Quick Reference Guide is not an actual regulation. It's not really anything more than a helpful tool, a helpful guide. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the camera. We're going to take a look at the Quick Reference Guide, a couple of the forms, and just various things that I have in our JI kit. All right. So this is a form. This is taken out of the Quick Reference Guide. I used it whenever I was actually preparing this box, so forgive all the scratches. I don't expect you to know what it means, because I don't really know what all that means anymore. And essentially, like it says right here, these items are for recommendation only. Pair and tailor to your mission needs. So essentially, if you think you might need it and if it'll fit, go ahead and put it in there. It outlines, a lot of the forms that you might need and kit supplies that you might need. As for the Quick Reference Guide, I've got a binder here. I have the actual Quick Reference Guide, not the full thing, not that full book that I was using earlier, but quite a bit of it. I've also got appendixes O through S of the DTR, and then various JI and aerial port forms. So if I open it up here, I've got you can see what I have as far as the quick reference guides go. We've got some things that list out aircraft characteristics. So I've got a guide. Here's a C-130, and then a bunch of notes regarding that. Now, this kind of thing is very helpful to have during a JI, just so that you understand, you know, what the capabilities of the aircraft that this cargo is going on actually is. I don't really have a specific example, but basically whenever you're conducting the JI and you are unsure if the cargo that your user has brought you will actually fit on an aircraft, or maybe it might exceed the weight limitations of the rollers at the floor or anything like that, quick reference guide in your JI kit has all of the characteristics and capabilities of not only the gray tail aircraft, but commercial contract aircraft as well, because we also load 747s, DC-10s, MD-11s, what have you. So we'll go past these guys. All right. Not too far. All right, so here's some JI deployment references. This right here is going to talk about the airfield operations. You got the marshalling yard, the alert holding area, the call forward area, and the ready line ramp area. And it really just goes into not great detail, but it does give you an idea of what is happening in each of these areas and whose responsibilities are what in each area. And then there's a little bit about constructing TCNs and TAC codes. Center of balance. This is a very big one. This is something that we check during a JI, and sometimes cargo personnel are going to go ahead and just do center of balance while we're doing a JI, but ideally the user should have already done it, and we're just making sure that they did it right. Shoring guidance. Now, shoring is something that's also supposed to be provided by the user. It goes into detail on what types of shoring that you need. Then you have some formulas for any of the different types of shoring. Here's some shoring for a box, for a skid, for drums with or without rims, shoring requirements for tracked vehicles, and of course the DTR goes into much more detail about pretty much all of this. Quick reference guide is just that, it's quick reference. This section talks about the 1015 guidance. The 1015 is the form that we use for inspecting hazardous materials. We have two different forms for inspection. One is for hazardous materials, and one is a general joint inspection checklist. The one for hazardous materials is the 1015. And the quick reference guide basically just breaks down block by block what each block of the 1015 actually means. 2133 is the JI checklist, which as a matter of fact I have right here. And this is what a JIer is using during the JI whenever he is, you know, walking around the vehicle or the pallet or whatever. The 1015 is kind of more for specific pieces of hazmat, but the JI checklist 2133 is for the whole JI. So this one goes through guidance for that. Here's some questions that you might ask yourself whenever you're filling out a 2133. And then some useful references. You have a Julian date calendar. Sometimes on different forms you have to write down the Julian date. Z time to local conversion. Useful websites where you can find any of the publications you might need or forms that you're missing. Telephone listings for program POCs, TACC, hazmat issues, things like that. Here's some JI kit publications that you might need. And of course, here's that other form that we looked at, but it's much cleaner. All right, now we've gotten to the different appendices for the DTR. Appendix O talks about the preparation of equipment and supplies and joint inspection procedures for military airlift. And I am not going to read all of this to you. I'll see if I can put a link in the description if you'd like to look at it, or if you would like to look at it whenever we can finally come back in person. Come on into special. We'll do a little training session. I can sign you off on whatever, and we can take a look at all of this stuff if you're interested. Here's some procedures for pallet buildup, standards for inspection, Appendix P covers center of balance. So anytime you're learning how to do center of balance, the reference that you need to be looking at is the DTR Appendix P. That's in Part 3. Talks about the WAM method, of course. There's also another formula that I don't know why you would ever use, because the WAM method is just so easy. Appendix Q talks about the marshalling area. Talks about who is responsible for maintaining the marshalling area and what their responsibilities actually are. In the marshalling area, the ones who have control over it is actually the deploying unit. So the user, they're the one that's where they're pretty much preparing their chocks, getting all of their cargo ready, making sure before it's JI'd that they have everything they need. In the alert holding area is after sorry, I'm just kind of reading it. I don't really read this all the time. Appendix S talks about the call forward area. In the call forward area, that is where we, the mobility force, conduct the joint inspection. By that time, they need to have everything ready, and if they don't, we can either decide to turn them away, or maybe if it's a small problem, you can fix it right then and there. That's another thing that's kind of important to note about the JI process. The JIer during the JI is really the one that's in control. And it's the JIer's prerogative to either, help fix an issue when it's found, or turn the user away and tell them to fix everything before we even continue. Sometimes that is necessary if things are packaged improperly, or if even if something's like incredibly dirty, if it's just simply not ready to be inspected, if it's not ready at that moment to be put on a plane, it needs to be taken care of. If it's something like forms, that's kind of why we have a bunch of different copies of different forms. If they messed up on the HAZ deck or anything like that, we can go ahead and print them out a new one. They can fill it out. If they're missing an ATTLA cert, but they already have all of their stuff together, they have all the shoring, they have everything they need, but they just forgot to print out the cert, let's just go ahead and print it out. It really is up to the JIer. And really, you don't want to be too much of a hard ass. Excuse my language, but you don't want to be too difficult when you are a JIer. You don't want to be hard-lined. If you're not ready by now, then you're not going. The only reason for that, I guess, and that's also kind of a personal preference really, but the reason for that is that you're probably going to be working with these users quite a bit, especially in a deployed location. You're going to be working with the same people moving, similar cargo quite often. The same units, the same logistics personnel for that unit. any unit is going to have somebody who's kind of in charge of preparing the cargo. They may not actually be a logistics person by trade, but they're assigned to do so. And so you're going to be dealing with these guys quite often. You don't want to have a bad relationship with them. You don't want to be seen as difficult to work with. You want to actually be helpful. That really will ultimately make it better for everyone in the long run. If you're helpful, you're kind of training them how to do it right. If they've messed something up, hey man, you've got this form is incorrect. Here's how you fill it out right. It's your responsibility to have it done whenever you get here, but we'll go ahead and take care of it right now. And that is going to help them understand how to do it right, and then hopefully in the future they do have it right and the JI can go much smoother. You also don't want to be a pushover. You don't want to just fix all the problems as they come up. At some point you do have to stop and tell them, hey, you guys are awful at this. We need to get this sorted out before you come back here again. Obviously that's I don't want to get too far into it because that's more of an OJT thing, but essentially, yeah, in the call forward area, that's where we're going to actually conduct the actual JI. Now we come to the forms part of my little binder. Here in the front I have the actual JI forms. This one is the 1015, the hazmat inspection and acceptance checklist. If there's ever any hazmat that you have to inspect as part of the JI, and that's going to be a pallet full of hazardous materials or even a vehicle, you're going to use one of these forms. The first few blocks here goes over the shipper's declaration for dangerous goods, or the HAZDEC that we call it. Everything else, this is talking more along the lines of your cargo identifiers, your labels, your making sure everything is actually marked and labeled the correct way, making sure it's all packaged the correct way. And anytime you're using this, you're also going to be using this, the 24204. Oh, sorry, you can't see it. 24204. Anything that's covered under this form has to be packaged in accordance with that one. So if you ever have any questions, whether or not pieces are compatible, whether or not things are marked and labeled or packaged the right way, you're going to go ahead and look in the AFMAN 24204. Here is the 2133. This is the JI checklist. Up here, where it's always a good idea to start with, is the documentation. It's the user's responsibility to have a load plan, and it's a preload plan because it still has to be validated by one of our load planners. They have to have their manifest, packing list, all that good to go. All of their HAZDECs have to be good to go. Any shipping labels, and the ATTLA certification. Now the ATTLA certification goes with certain vehicles or very big pieces of cargo that might be on a pallet train. And the ATTLA, basically what an ATTLA letter certification does is it talks about the proper loading of any of these vehicles. I don't have one right now off the top of my head. An ATTLA is required for a vehicle that's over 10,000 pounds, longer than 10 feet, a pallet train that's longer than, I don't really remember right now. I can try to include an ATTLA certification in the description of this video so that you can actually look at one, and I'll get back to you whenever I post this video on the actual requirements for an ATTLA. It also talks about shoring, because obviously if it's a very long vehicle, it's going to need shoring to get up the ramp. If it's got really big tires, it's going to need parking shoring, or sleeper shoring, I'm sorry. If it's got metal tracks like a tank, it's going to need parking shoring and rolling shoring as well. So the ATTLA certification lines all of that out. It's the user's responsibility to have that ATTLA certification, have all of the shoring required to actually load that vehicle. And like I said, sometimes if you're in a pinch, if the aircraft has got to be loaded right now and you don't have the shoring, then sometimes we are going to have to build it. On my first deployment, I built all kinds of shoring. Sometimes we had to have Red Horse build it. It's not ideal. It's not the way it's supposed to work, but it happens. Moving on, we have the shipper's declaration for dangerous goods. Now, this accompanies any and every piece of hazardous material. It's affixed to the aircraft. Special handling keeps a copy. Not affixed to the aircraft. It's affixed to the piece along with the shipping label. We keep a copy for our records, and it goes in the aircraft copy with the manifest and everything else. Attachment 17 of the 24204 outlines exactly how to fill out a HazDeck. Block by block, it tells you every single thing you need to know. It's quite honestly dummy proof. So anytime you need help filling one out, and anytime a user needs help filling one out, direct them to attachment 17. HazDecks have to have these red hash marks. Like, that's an absolute fact. They have to have these red hash marks. If you print it out and they're gray, like if you can tell, these smaller ones are grayed out because it wasn't printed in color. We have special paper that we print these back out on that has the red hash marks. Or actually, I've also seen it acceptable to just take a red marker and make the hash marks. Whatever works. So if you ever get into looking at the 24204, it also has some examples of a fully filled out HazDeck. So I'm not really going to go into all of it, but just so you know, it's here. I've also got pallet identifier in here, special handling data certification 1387-2. I've got military shipping label, got a cargo manifest, got a passenger manifest. Most of these things are not really going to be needed or used for a JI, but in a JI kit, it's good to be prepared. It's good to have all kinds of things that you might need. Because as a JIer, and honestly as a 2T2, you might have to go to locations and load aircraft that there really are no capabilities, there really are no services. You might not even have a computer, so everything's going to be manual. And it's a good idea, in case somebody forgets something, to have some extras in your JI kit. I've got some frustrated cargo forms, got some TCMDs, TCMD log, 1907 signature and tally record, security container check sheet, security cage log, and inventory. Security cage is something that special handling maintains. This is anything, signature service or hazmat cargo. Can't just be stored out in the yard anywhere. My cap logs, 1297 temporary issue receipt, because sometimes we need that kind of thing. IMT 457 safety hazard report, because anything can happen. You can get yourself hurt. It's a good idea to have one of those on hand. And that's kind of it. That's it in a nutshell. That's my binder. And of course, I've also got a hard copy of the 24204. This is the most up-to-date copy that I'm aware of. Normally, whenever you have a computer, for inspection purposes especially, you're supposed to have the electronic version of the 24204, and they're kind of trying to shy away from the hard copy. I think really just because if you look it up on EPUBs and get it from there, it's going to be the most up-to-date version, and generally the hard copy is probably going to be an older one. Funny story, whenever I did I got access to the Hazmat Exportable. I'm coming up on the end of my 2-year certification, so I need to retest, and I got into the course on ATLS. I printed off the study guide, and it also had a copy of a 24204 that I can study with as well. And its publication date was 2009. So yeah, I guess they expected me to test on, you know, something that's well over 10 years old. So cool. And I don't really want to go through this whole publication because there's quite a bit to unpack. Whenever you are in a deployed location, generally speaking, you're going to fall under Chapter 3, which is Tactical Contingency or Emergency Airlift. Whenever you're looking up things like vehicle fuel levels or compatibility requirements during your JI, if you are overseas in a deployed location, chances are where you need to be looking is Chapter 3. And everywhere in all these attachments, it is going to say, you know, there's going to be different requirements for Chapter 3. It'll tell you, it'll spell it out. When you go through the hazmat inspection course, they do their best to really kind of get into the nitty-gritty of this form. I've gone through the inspector course twice already and prepare, so we also dealt with the 24204 in that. So I'm fairly good at kind of remembering where things are and how to look up and how to find things, but really it comes down to actually getting into that form and looking for it and familiarizing yourself with it. Now this is a little bit jumbled up and messy just because I had to pull those binders out, but this is what remains of the JI kit. You got bolt cutters for any time a unit has something that's locked up and they don't provide you a key or a combination to the lock. We still have to look inside. If it's like an ISU 90 or 70 or anything like that, we still have to look inside it and make sure they're not trying to squirrel anything away. Make sure everything inside it is properly packaged and restrained. So if they ever do that, we have a persuader. I've also got some old light wands. They were already in here, so I just left them there. And you know, the rest of it's kind of just various office supplies, really. We're going to need a tape measure to conduct the JI. We'll probably need some tape, maybe a CB marking just needs to be redone. It looks like, you know, it doesn't look too good, so maybe we just need to retape it. That's easy. We can just do it right then and there. Got a couple of calculators for the purpose of, you know, actually checking weights. You know, pens, rubber bands. I got some TOs in here. And the rest of it, all kinds of different labels. And that's another thing that's very easy. If you're doing your JI and you notice some of the hazardous cargo doesn't have a label, or it's not labeled in the right place, or it's wearing off and you can't really see it, just have some extras, slap it on there, go ahead and roll with it. We've also got some placards for vehicles, anytime we need to move that hazardous cargo. Honestly, that's essentially it. Like I said, kind of just office supplies, really. But like I said, you might end up going to a location to conduct a JI where you're out in literally the middle of a field and you don't have an office to go grab something from, you know. So it's a good idea, good practice to have a very well-stocked JI kit. Like I said, I don't even have everything on this list. Everything that's circled, I don't have. So I don't have the first aid kit, don't have a flashlight in here. Carbon paper, that's not really a thing much anymore. Sunblock, oh, there's one. Sunblock, water, bug spray, all that stuff. You could be, I'm telling you, you could be going anywhere. And obviously, especially if you're forward deploying, whenever you're deployed, you could be going anywhere. You need to be prepared. Zip ties, 2-hole punch. I got a 3-hole punch. Tire pressure gauges, that's a big one. Reg mail, metal seals, and a utility knife if you're not already carrying one yourself. I did not bring them out, but you also need to have the portable scales with you to check the center of balance. It's just me right now, so I'm not really going to go through the entire JI, because usually a JI is going to be conducted with the user, so they're going to have people there to help you. And most likely there's going to be people, someone else in special handling or cargo, or whoever wants to help out. That's a lot of the only JI experience that I've actually had firsthand. On my first deployment, I actually went to Al Dhafra when I was active duty, and I was there as a PAX guy, PAX and Fleet, but I helped out on any JI that I could. I helped out on any ramp or cargo mission that I could, because I wanted to learn more about the career field. And so I helped out on plenty JIs. I kind of get the idea of what I'm doing. It's been a long time, and I've been in special handling in this unit, and I'm learning. I'm learning how to do and conduct JIs. It is a long process. It is, like I said, you have to get in there and actually do it to really learn it. The book can only tell you so much. So right now what we're going to kind of do is take a look at our 2133, oh my God, 2133. Basically what you're going to do when you're filling this out: who's the deploying force, departure airfield, aircraft type, just general header information. Is this a Chapter 3 movement, yes or no? Now, when filling out the 2133, you see all of these lines here could be separate chalks. You see here block 10 increment, serial bumper number, TCN. You're not going to fill out the TCN like, one letter at a time. I don't know why I'm holding this. You're not going to fill out the TCN one letter at a time, in each block. It's more along the lines of, for each TCN, for each chalk number, what have you, you're doing this in this one block, and you fill out everything down here, and then the next TCN, chalk number, what have you, is in this next one. So for the documentation, that's the first thing you want to look at, because that's the easiest thing to fix. You're going to look at their preload plan, have load planning, take a look at it, make sure it's good to go. They might need to make some changes, or tell them to make changes rather, and validate it. Take a look at the manifest, make sure all of the pieces are there, make sure everything's there and ready. You're going to take a look at all of the HAZ decks, make sure they're filled out properly, make sure that all of the labels and everything is filled out, and make sure they have the ATTLA certification, and make sure that it's the correct ATTLA certification. Sometimes they bring one that is not for the specific piece that they have. So whenever you're looking at that, you can just go online to the ATTLA website, pull one up, print it out for them. It's as easy as that. Now for general requirements, the first thing you're going to look at is the vehicle clean. Hopefully they bring you one that is clean, but obviously if you're in the desert, chances are high you're not gonna be able to keep it very clean. It doesn't have to be shiny and sparkly, but I think the proper verbiage is thin film of road dust is allowed, but anything that's chunks of dirt, not really allowable. And that's more of a agricultural customs thing than anything, because anytime an aircraft comes in from an overseas location, whatever country it's landing in has its own inspection process, whatever their equivalent is to a Department of Agriculture or Customs. They might impound you the entire aircraft if they find something that they don't like, deport you, anything like that. So got to make sure that there isn't any kind of weird material, substance, dirt, what have you, that's gonna get on the plane or track into somebody else's country. So for cleanliness, let's just take a look at this truck here. It's fairly clean for the most part, but I do see, we've been out to the drop zone quite a bit, driving on dirt roads and through cow flops and stuff out in the field. So it does have some dirt on it. Now, I would not call this a thin film of road dust. The rest of the truck isn't really that bad. It's, kind of nice and shiny, but all down up under here, probably underneath, there is chunks of stuff and grass that could fall out onto the aircraft, ultimately get onto the airfield, into the atmosphere of whatever country you're landing in. Here's a bad one. Here's all kinds of junk. And so really what I would tell the user if they brought me something like this is, hey, before we put this on the plane, you need to clean it up. Now, if we have the capability, if we have a hose in our yard, I would just say, hey man, I'll keep doing the JI. We can go ahead, as soon as we're done, we'll just go ahead and wash this thing off. Easy peasy. If you don't have that capability, then maybe you might have to turn them away and tell them, I'm sorry, but I need you to clean this thing before we can actually continue. If you do find an issue like that, there's really no point in continuing the entire JI, because they're just going to have to come back and you're going to have to do it again. So, well, on the other hand, I'm too far into this video to quit now, so I'll just go ahead and backtrack. Sometimes it would be necessary to just go ahead and keep going with the JI if you find an issue. If it's a really big issue, you might as well just stop. If it won't even start, if the battery dies while you're doing the JI, or if you got a really bad fluid leak or something, you might as well just quit and tell them to fix it and bring it back some other time. But if it's something like cleanliness, or if it's not really that big of an issue, if it is fixable, then maybe you could just kind of continue with the JI, look at all the rest of this stuff here, and just tell them, hey, I can't sign this thing off, it's not airworthy right now, go fix this issue. When you come back, we'll do it all again, and then as long as you fixed it, then we can actually keep going. Again, that sort of kind of comes down to discretion of the JIer, and you're gonna learn a lot more of how to handle that situation through on-the-job training. There's multiple ways to go about it. So for cleanliness, like I said, the outside, just around the wheel wells and that's a little bit too dirty for my taste. The next thing we're going to look at on the form is fuel leaks. So I've already got the engine popped. Now we're not going to go through like a full-on 1800 inspection of the vehicle. I don't really care what the oil level is or any of that, but I do care that I'm not leaking oil or transmission fluid or anything like that. So we're just going to kind of take a look and see, you know, I don't see any leaks on the engine itself. I don't see any leaks on the floor. So I'd say for fluid leaks on this vehicle, we're good. Scale weight, of course, I don't have the scales on me, but whenever the unit has conducted the center of balance, they're going to have to have gotten the actual gross weight, and that's going to be, you know, somewhere in this general area is where you're probably going to have the T, and it's going to have the gross vehicle weight and then the center of balance from front end. You're also going to have marked the axle weights over each axle, and sometimes they might have marked the tire pressure on that same piece of paper over each axle. So what you're looking for is to make sure they've written the gross weight and the axle weight and that it's marked on both sides. You also want the dimensions of the thing, of what, you know, this, in this case it's a pickup truck. You also want to make sure that the dimensions of this truck will fit on the aircraft that you're using, which goes back to, in the quick reference guide, we have, you know, all of the aircraft capabilities listed out. You're going to find the dimensions on the load plan, and a load planner is going to be, you know, better than me at making sure that the dimensions are correct. But of course, we have the tape measure, so we're just going to go ahead and measure the truck, measure and make sure it has the correct dimensions. Center of balance marked on both sides. Like I said, we're going to have the T with the gross vehicle weight and the CB with an arrow saying from front end. That is something that they should do before they bring it to us, and we are just going to verify. So we would have our portable scales, and we would just basically redo the CB, and we're going to verify that they've marked it in the correct spot. Oops. Keys and combinations to all locks. So, you know, make sure you have the keys for the vehicle, make sure you have the keys for any padlocks that you're going to have on ISUs, ISU 90s. And if they don't have those things, obviously they need to get some if they want to keep it locked, but we have our persuader. Shoring. Of course, the ATTLA letter will talk about the limitations for the floors and the rollers, and so will, by the way, our quick reference guide in the aircraft capabilities. It's the user's requirement to bring the shoring, so we have to make sure that they have brought everything that they need. Hazardous materials preparation and packaging, that's where the 24204 comes in, and the 1015. So anything that's hazardous, we're going to make sure that it is properly labeled and packaged. The vehicle's non-powered equipment, what we're going to do is look at the mechanical condition, make sure it runs. Chances are very high that you've watched the user drive into your yard, so, you know, pretty safe to say that it runs. Brakes are operational. That's something that you can also do. You can just go line by line and then tell somebody to get into the vehicle and start it up, make sure it goes. Then just tell them to creep forward a little bit, make sure the brakes work. The battery, make sure that it's secured, the terminals are protected, and no leaks. So you can, you know, whenever you've done your leak check, you can tell that there weren't any leaks. But you also want to make sure the terminals are secured. Now this battery here, here's the battery, here's one terminal, here's another terminal. They look pretty gosh darn covered to me. If a terminal isn't covered, that's kind of where the duct tape in your JI kit comes in. You can just duct tape it and it is at that point covered. And then of course we need to make sure that it's secured. You know, most of the time it's just going to be a little bracket that you screw in This one has its own little cradle. I'd say that battery's good to go. Fuel tanks, level and caps. On this vehicle, of course, we have a fuel cap, and it's got one of those things, so it doesn't actually have a screw-on cap, but if it's supposed to have a screw-on cap, make sure it does. And then you'd get in here and you check the fuel level. The 24204 tells you how much fuel a vehicle is allowed to have during regular operations and during Chapter 3 movements. During regular operations, I'll just go ahead and tell you that a vehicle can have no more than a half a tank, and during Chapter 3 movements, it's allowed to have up to 3/4 of a tank. But you need to make sure, and on a vehicle, sometimes an older forklift or something else, it might actually have a gauge, so you'll just have to look down into the tank, get a dipstick and gauge it that way. Jerry cans, make sure they're secure, make sure they're sealed, make sure that if they're allowed to have fuel. Most of the time they're not, but if they're allowed to have fuel in them, make sure that it's the correct level. Tie down points, making sure that any tie down points are actually serviceable. Pintle hooks, if a pintle hook is used, we're checking to make sure that it's installed correctly and serviceable. Vehicle equipment secured, that's going to be your fire extinguishers, anything that's a part, the crane on a AT, making sure anything like that is secured so it's not just going to flop around or fly around while it's in flight. Another example would be the ladder on the Halverson over there, making sure something like that is secured. Tire pressure, like I said, in the JI kit we should have tire pressure gauges. We're making sure, now the ATTLA certification, depending on what kind of tire it is going to tell you how much pressure you're allowed to have in that tire, because obviously whenever you get into the air, pressure inside that aircraft is going to be different than pressure on the ground. You don't want to have too much whenever you take off, because when you get in the air, that tire might pop. Accompanying load within rated capacity and secured. So essentially, if you're pulling up a vehicle with a trailer and they're going to stay together during in flight. And then LOX nitrogen cart, make sure that it has a vent kit on it. It's a very specific piece of equipment that you're just going to have to learn about it, and whenever you run into it, really. Pallets, pallet trains, obviously you want to make sure that the pallet is serviceable, doesn't have any delamination, that the rings are all intact and not broken. There's no cracks in the pallet or dents or gouges. Correctly built, items secured. You're just basic pallet buildup. You're making sure that that everything is tied down the correct way, that you're using the right, if you need chains and devices and nets and straps, you're making sure that all of them are being used properly. And dunnage, if it's necessary, the unit will have to provide their own dunnage for the pallet. They might be going to a location where there may not be a whole lot of support. There may not be dunnage at the location they're going to. They may not have a full air terminal where they're going to, and it's up to them. Obviously, in a perfect world, it's up to the user to provide their own dunnage for each and every pallet that they're trying to move. Helicopters, I'm really not going to go into helicopters. I've never JI'd a helicopter, never seen anybody JI a helicopter, but there you go. That's it's on here too. At that point, once I shouldn't have thrown that down, because there's one other thing I need to go over. whenever you're filling out this form, you're going to put a check mark next to everything that's satisfactory. You're going to put an X next to everything that's unsatisfactory. Once it's fixed, you're going to put a you're going to circle the X to signify that the item has been corrected. And if anything doesn't apply to this specific piece, you're going to put in a little dash in this spot. So for the most part, it's going to just be dashes in the helicopter section and like the LOX cart and jerry cans. If it doesn't have a jerry can, it's going to be just dashed out for that. That's how you properly fill out one of those forms, and that's how you essentially properly do a JI. It's very difficult to really give you an idea of how to properly do a JI without having you all here in person to watch us do a JI. So hopefully whenever we come back, whenever we're actually able to come back as a unit and conduct UTA, we'll be able to actually have some real JI training. You need to get your hands on it. You need to see it. You need to actually go through the form and fill it out. You need to see mistakes, and be able, you need to see mistakes in the HAZDEC. You need to see mistakes in marking and labeling. Technically, since this truck doesn't have CB on it, that's not acceptable, and I would have had to mark down an X in the center of balance and gross vehicle weight sections of the 2133. So that's pretty much it for this video. Hopefully I didn't confuse you too much. Like I said earlier, if anyone has any more experience than I do and need to clarify something that I said or maybe add to it, feel free to do so in the comments, and feel free to do so in your virtual UTA discussion. Also, like I said earlier, I'm going to try to include links in the description for anything that I went over, like any of the forms, any of the publications, and I will look up the requirements for an ATTLA certification, because I missed that earlier. I forgot to bring one out here. Other than that, this has been a good experience for me. It's the first time I've ever done a video like this. Hopefully it wasn't too terrible. I hope everyone has a very good rest of your virtual UTA. I hope this video was at least somewhat informative, and I really hope that everyone at some point in your careers that you actually get to be involved in some JIs, because honestly it's pretty fun. It is a pretty cool job. That's all I got for you. Thanks for watching.